Hi, I'm Kevin Zimmerman from Unlocking Black History on YouTube. Last week, I saw Senator Raphael Warnock make a statement that captured my attention. The statement said, dealing with this current moment requires a historical perspective. He went on to discuss how the Save America Act goes against everything that our civil rights leaders fought and died for. Now, on this live stream, what I'm going to do is provide a historical perspective. I'm going to reiterate the barriers that blacks in America have had to face and overcome, by the way, time and time again, whenever it came to participating in America's diplomatic process. Now, it is said that the purpose of the Save America Act is to safeguard our democratic process. The purpose is designed to prevent people from cheating. A point that I'm going to address later in this session on our live stream. Now, when we're going to look at things from a historical perspective, especially when viewed through the lens of Black history, the Save America Act appears to be nothing more than a modern means of voter suppression. Sure, the narrative sounds good, but we've seen these patterns before. So, over the next few minutes on this live stream, we're going to evaluate America's consistent and well-documented pattern when it comes to black participation in our diplomatic process. We have to start at 1776, the Declaration of Independence, written by 5 authors: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Ben Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. We know the Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal. Yet, the primary author held people enslaved for 12 years prior to penning the Declaration of Independence, and then throughout the remainder of his lifetime afterwards. Yet, no school required a closer evaluation when teaching about this history of Thomas Jefferson's relation to penning the Declaration of Independence. When we move on to Reconstruction, we look at the period at the end of slavery. The Civil War has ended, 1865. The 13th Amendment is brought forward and it abolished slavery. 4 million black people are now in American society that could participate in this process. However, how did America respond to that opportunity for blacks? Voter suppression. Through poll taxes, literacy tests, violent death at the hands of the KKK, loss of jobs, evictions from their homes, or no loans or credits. Why did America respond like this? because black political participation threatens the existing racial and power structure. Fast forward to the civil rights movement. Jim Crow is coming to an end. But on June 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy met with Dr. Martin Luther King in the White House, in the Oval Office, to discuss the advancement of the civil rights movement. 3 months later, on November the 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, enforcing the 15th Amendment that banned discrimination against voting, people for voting. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you this. This is the start of democracy in America. Not 1776, but the signing of the Voting Rights and the Civil Rights Act. Yet, America wasn't done responding. On April the 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So what forms of voter suppression came after the Voting Rights Act passed? Let's look at the 1970s through the 1990s, the period of mass incarceration and felony disenfranchisement. Many states barred people with felony convictions. That disproportionately impacted Black Americans from voting. You say that's not a bad thing. Well, the irony is the person sitting in the office of the presidency of the United States right now has 34 felony counts in criminal indictments. Move on to the 2000s. They start purging voter rolls and tightening registration requirements. That too had a negative impact on Black communities and people of color. Then we look at the 2020 election. Donald Trump claimed he lost the 2020 election. All communities he claimed that cheated, that stole the election, are communities that had a high number of Blacks and people of color. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Now, remember we said we were going to address this later. More than 60 court cases were filed challenging the 2020 election results, and the large majority were dismissed or ruled against him, stating that there was no sufficient evidence. But recently, the state of Texas passed a racially motivated gerrymandering map. Now we see the Save America Act being put forth today. As we observe the resistance that Black Americans had to face time and time again, I ask this question, that we consider, stop asking Black America, do you love America? And I say that because we looked at 1776, and it states that all men are created equal. Yet when it comes to the diplomatic process to be a part of America, all we've seen through the inception of this country to the present that Black Americans are not treated equally. It's well documented. It's just not my point of view. We look at the Declaration of Independence and its primary author, and we learn that he held enslaved people for 12 years prior to penning the Declaration of Independence, and then continued to enslave people throughout his lifetime afterwards. Therefore, when we take something of that nature into consideration, there is no earthly justification that can state that there was pure moral intent when expressed that all men were created equal, because clearly the actions of the primary author demonstrated that blacks in America were not considered a part of that statement. Fast forward to the end of Jim Crow. Okay, fast forward. Well, let's look at the end of the Civil War. Fast forward to the end of Civil War. It is noted at this period that American black men, or black men in America, could vote. But what was America's reaction to the first time that we were able to vote? Now, mind you, we just had 4 million plus people released into the American society. Remind you that we built the American society. Remind you that it was on the backs of black slaves, that America had been propelled into a world superpower. Remind you that it was the enslavement of black people that thrusted the Americas forward into the Industrial Revolution. But yet, when it came to us having the opportunity to take part in the diplomatic process, America's response to that was horrific. And we fought through that all the way through Jim Crow, where we dealt with voter suppression at its highest form, when we were forced to take poll taxes, forced to pay poll taxes. White Americans we were forced to take literacy tests. When many white Americans, we were beaten and killed at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan just to take part in the American process. Fast forward through that period on to the Civil Rights Act, and the day that John F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood in the White House, in the Oval Office, to discuss the advancement of civil rights. One would ask, from a human state of mind, why would we have to have that discussion in the first place? But let's look at America's response once again. From that moment of John F. Kennedy standing with Dr. Martin Luther King and civil rights leaders in the White House, in the Oval Office, 3 months later, the President of the United States was assassinated. That was America's response. Then the Civil Rights Voting Act was finally signed and put forward. That, again, I want to reiterate, was the beginning of democracy in America, not 1776, the signing of the Voting Rights Act, ending discrimination of anyone who had the right to vote. That was the start of American democracy. How did America respond? Voter suppression, mass incarceration, disenfranchising thousands, maybe even millions of black people from the opportunity to vote. States, 11 states I know of for sure, do not allow felonies to vote. Yet we have a president with 34 felony convictions sitting in Washington, D.C. That's how America responded. So I once again make the statement, please do not ask black Americans, do we love America? I suggest to you that the more appropriate question should be, here in 2026, does America genuinely love